Today I'm going to show you how I make sourdough. I started this in June by making my own starter, and I've made several loaves since then. It's now October. So I'm going to show you the way I do it. There's a lot of resources out there which are great, and I use those. I had to put things in a format that I could understand it because everybody thinks differently. And I took recipes off the internet, and I'm going to share those links. And then I had to rewrite them for myself so that they made sense to me. So I still keep my notes here because I don't have it completely memorized yet. So I'm starting in the kitchen here because I just cleaned all the windows yesterday. And it's an overcast day. The windows look nice and clean. So I thought it would be a good time to record my sourdough process. I fed my starter early this morning. I named my starter Homer after my dearly departed dog, and it's already doubled, and it's been a few hours. I'm just going to set this aside. Now it's October, so our house is a little chilly. I have the light on in the oven. I warmed it up, shut it off, put the light on in the oven, and then this can be in the oven so it stays warm because the house is kind of cool. So this is what I do. I just use a glass bowl. This is the scale, and you definitely need a scale. It seems like if you're used to baking without a scale, you're so used to cups and measuring, but you have to use the scale to get the proportions correct. And this is, I got off of Walmart. It was really cheap, and I've been using it for several months now. So I'm putting the scale on, and I do a mix of bread flour, whole wheat, and dark rye. It just gives a nice hearty flavor, and I've been doing that for the past several loaves. So let's start with that. So I use 300 grams of bread flour. You're looking for 500 grams total, and this makes one nice size loaf, and I only do one loaf at a time. Okay, so that's 300 of the bread flour. And then I do 100 grams of the dark rye and 100 of the whole wheat. Almost. There we go. Okay. I've made it with the combination of the bread flour and the whole wheat, and that was delicious as well. The rye it adds a nice flavor. Like I said, it's kind of hearty. It's not too much of a heavy rye flavor. But you can test and see what you like. Okay, so that's 500 grams of flour. And it is 375 grams of lukewarm water. So I clear the scale out, and then I add the water. And you want lukewarm water so that it just is getting the dough at room temperature. Okay, so that's ready to mix. Now this is called the autolyse phase, and you just mix it so that all the dough is wet. A lot of people show you that dough thing. I'm going to show it to you. A lot of people will start with this. This drives me crazy because then the dough is stuck in all these grooves and things, and I like the easy button. So I don't use this. I use this, and it's a way to mix the dough without getting dough in all the grooves. So the goal here is to incorporate the flour and the water so that it is wet. That's all we're doing. And then we're going to let this sit. But I do use my hand sometimes if I just want to get down there on the bottom to get all that dough wet. So it is very sticky, but all the flour has been moistened by the water. And you can see this is easier to clean than that. So here's the dough. And then we're just going to cover this with a towel and let it rest for 30 minutes. I dampen a towel with warm water, and that's what I use to cover the bowl. And then we're just going to wait 30 minutes to let that kind of soften a little bit. Then we're going to add the starter, more water, and salt. Okay, so about 30 minutes have passed. It's time to add the starter, and we add 100 grams of starter. Now, I just want to show you the starter. This has doubled in size. It started around here this morning, and I feed it regularly, so it's very active. It's warm. So what I do is I take the scale, turn it on, wait for it to be 0. I put the bowl on, I clear it out, and I'm going to add, I'm just wetting the spoon so the starter doesn't stick so much. And oh, you could do the float test. I know it's done, and I'm just going to show you this. You can test it if you're not 100% sure. As long as your starter floats, it's ready to use. So I'm just going to pull that out, put that in there. So we're going to do 100 grams of starter. Pour it right on top. Okay, so we're at 100, and it's key to have wet fingers. So now I'm just going to set this aside, and I'll put this back in the fridge. And I feed my starter about once a week. I take it out, feed it. After I do the discard, set that aside, feed it, and then I just leave it in the fridge. That's how my starter's worked, and it's been perfect since June. So we have the 100 grams of starter added. And you have to use your hands for this portion. So the key is you have to wet your hands, not too much because you don't want to over wet your dough. Mix this in. You just want the starter to be incorporated into the dough. And this is when I like to use this because it pulls all the starter off of the sides and mixes it in. I feel like it's almost more effective than my hand. So we're just mixing the starter in. You have to know how it feels, so you can see that it's sticky, but it's not very springy yet. That will come later. So here's what it looks like. It's still a little wet. Now we're going to add the salt and just a touch more water. So again, we have to refer to the scale. And we're going to add 10 grams of water and 10 grams of salt. Okay, it's 10 grams of salt. And I just pour that right on top. And 10 grams of water. Again, using the lukewarm water. And pour that on top of the salt. Now I don't need the scale any longer for this process. So you see the salt is there with the water. It's a good way to get it wet. And again, I know me and my scraper. You just want to make sure the salt is incorporated. That's all this process is. So it's very wet. You'll see how it will change. So it's kind of wet and kind of tight. So I just mix it so that it forms a ball. There's lots of videos you can do, but this is, like I said, this is how I do it. And I just make it into a little ball, and I'm going to cover it. I'm going to let this sit for, I think it's just 10 minutes. Just let it sit for 10 minutes so that it kind of gives a chance for that salt to completely dissolve. I let this rest for 10 minutes, and the dough is well incorporated with the starter. I've set the timer for 10 minutes because we're going to fold this and rotate for about 10 minutes so that it's well incorporated. And you'll see that it'll start to go from sticky to smooth and more elastic. So I'm just going to dampen my hands a little bit and show you. I mean, you can already see after just that 10 minutes, it's softer, easier to stretch. But as I turn it, you see it gets a little tighter. So I'm going to continue to stretch this. And I have to kind of force it. If you were doing a 2-loaf mix, which I've seen in video, it's more dough, so it seems, you know, more volume that moves. So I end up using 2 hands, and this is the way I've been doing it. Turn the dough, stretch it, fold it, turn it, stretch it, and you're almost like you're ripping it. The key is to force it to stretch. You want that gluten structure to relax, and that happens over time. There's a lot of science to it. I don't claim to understand, and you do kind of have to dampen your hands, not too wet, because you don't want the dough to get too wet. Okay, so some of the things I learned, because trying to learn this as a novice on my own, just using the internet, reading and watching. And I watched the pros, and like the Perfect Loaf guy, I forgot his name. It's an Italian name. And he makes it look so easy because he's been doing it so long. He knows how the dough should feel, how it, you know, and the stages of when the dough changes. But when you're new and you're watching video, you don't get to touch the dough. So you're not really sure. And I don't know how many loaves I've made, but I've only had one bad result. And that was because the dough was overproofed. And you don't want that because it just becomes flat. So for 10 minutes, just keep stretching and folding. And you'll see how this will change and be less sticky too over the course of the folds. So I'm just going to continue this for 10 minutes. This is how it looks after 10 minutes of the stretching and folding. And once again, I just like the scraper just to clean the bowl up so I can see where the dough level is, because we're going to want this to double in volume. But I just want to show you how you can see how much more stretchy and soft it is. Still a little shaggy, a little sticky. And I haven't seen any other sourdough in person. So what I've seen on TV, and this is the consistency it's been while I've been making the loaves for the past few months. So to me, it is a little sticky, but if you keep wetting your hand, your dough is getting too wet. So it's kind of hard not to keep trying to wet your hand. It is just going to stick to you in this phase. But you'll see when we start to do the stretches and folds, it gets softer and less sticky. So here's the dough when I'm done with the first set of stretching and folding. We want this to double in size. And the dough is supposed to be 76 to 80 degrees is what they recommend. My house is chilly right now. And right now the dough is 72 degrees. So I need to get that warmed up. So I'm going to use my oven with the light on. And it is nice and warm in there. You have to find a warm place because the dough needs to be warm for it to rise. So we're going to let this rest for 60 minutes, come back, and then we'll start to do the folds. I've let the dough sit in the warm oven. Like I said, the oven has the light on, so it is very warm. You can see the dough here. It's still glossy, but it has risen a little bit. It's been an hour. You can see some bubbles here that have started to form. So there's something happening. I'm going to check the temperature of the dough. Okay, it's up to 80 degrees, so that's good. So the oven is warm enough. So we're going to do a series of folds, 4 different folds every 30 minutes. And then I'm going to let it rest. So I'm just going to slightly wet my hand, just a little bit, not too wet. And we're going to do the folds. So you can see that the dough is much softer, still a little sticky, but I haven't touched other doughs. I've just been doing it. It's the way I've been doing it. and it's still a little sticky. I'm far from any expert, that is for sure. So I did the 4 folds by turning the bowl, and this is the size of it. Covering with the damp cloth. Back in the oven for 30 minutes. It's been another 30 minutes, and the dough is slowly getting a little larger. We're going to check the temperature. The digital read is great for this. It's holding at 80 degrees, which is good. Just wetting my hand again. So we're doing the series of 4 folds. It feels warm, it feels soft, and it's getting less sticky. But you can see how soft and elastic it's getting. And just so you can see that there's some nice bubble down here on the bottom. But as this sits in the warm oven, I just wanted to reiterate, the oven is not on. It's just, I have the light on and I preheated it so it's warm. And this will go back into the warm oven for another half hour, and we'll do this 2 more times, and then we will let it rest for bulk fermentation. So it will just continue to grow in size. This is my last fold before I let it rest. So this, I wanted to show you you can see the dough does look lighter and fluffier. There are some air bubbles in there. And it's kind of hard to measure, but you saw how small it was. So it's clearly has risen in volume. So this is my last fold I'm going to do before I cover and then let it sit for a couple hours. So again, just lightly wetting my hands. It's much softer. It's not as sticky. I'm being gentle. I don't want to break down any bubbles that are in there that have formed. So you lift, fold, and turn the bowl. And I just like to smooth it out. Here it is. I'm going to cover it and then let it rest probably for a couple hours. And then I'll do what they call shaping for the first pre-shaping. And we'll do that in a couple hours when the dough is a little bit larger. And I wanted to say that since I'm a novice, I wanted to share my process after I listened to so many experts. And I'm sharing this as a new person. You look at the pros and they've done it for so long, so they have a lot of experience. I've only been doing this since June. So June, July, August, September, 4 months, probably 15 loaves, 1 failure, still working on the scoring. But I just want to understand the process by memory so that I don't have to refer to the notes and I'll just know by the feel. And why I wanted to make the video is because as a new person, you have a lot of questions and sometimes it just doesn't make sense while you're watching the videos. So you just have to be patient and then just trust in yourself that if you follow instructions and you give it time and let it proof and don't try to experiment with too many other things. I see people that are putting blueberries in or different flavors or chocolate and things, and they're still really new at it. So I'm trying to get a grip on the regular plain sourdough before I branch out and start to get fancy. So that's my thoughts as a novice sourdough maker. Let's cover it up for one last time before we do the pre-shaping. So the dough is ready and it's been a few hours. And the more you do this, you'll kind of get a sense. It's not always the same amount of time. Today, I felt as though it went faster because I kept the oven warm because it's cool in the house now. So I just made sure the oven was warm. If your house is cold, it might take longer. In the summer, it'll go faster. So it's not always the same time. That's one thing that I have to keep telling myself, because I look at the chart and the list, so many hours, so many folds, but you just have to go by how it feels and how it looks. And this has definitely doubled in size. So this is called your pre-shaping. And I just use regular bread flour, regular white flour for this, just to right here on the, on the table or the counter. So I put the flour on the table, and I like to keep the scrapers on hand. So I'll use regular flour for this. The white rice flour is for the coating of the dough when it's in the basket. So the proofing basket, I just put it in, coat it like I would a baking dish. When you prepare a baking for the oven with the butter. Now, with the butter and flour. So I just coat it in there. When I first started doing it, I was just using a bowl with a towel in it, and I was dusting the towel, and I thought that was fine. But as I done it for a few months now, I realized that the baskets are valuable and important. It keeps the shape smaller. This just is the perfect size. I think this is an 8-inch. I don't remember exactly. Anyhow, so you want to make sure that's really well coated with the rice flour. And I'm going to gently let this come out of the bowl on its own. Sometimes it sticks a little, so I will use my hand to get that out. You just want to be gentle. It feels very nice. It's warm. Yours might come right out. It might not have any stick, but it's just not 100% the same for everybody. I do like to use the scraper here just to be able to get underneath of it. So you want to be gentle, but you just pull it out, and you want to, kind of make it a tight package to start. So I just pull it in. So you saw what I did. I did a few folds to bring it into the center, just trying to make it a little tighter. Trying to keep it round and tight. And you're just going to have to play with it. But you want to be gentle enough where you can see there's some bubbles here. You don't want to mess with that. So I'm just going to let this rest for a little bit with the towel, dry towel here. We'll just let that set for about 15-20 minutes so it can relax. I just wanted to show you, this is something they don't tell you about in the video, is how you have to wash the dough. But you have to use cold water because it helps the gluten relax. And you need a silicone sponge. So the cold water, it just relaxes. So I'm using this sponge here, cold water, a little bit of elbow grease. So it takes a little bit of effort, but that's pretty good. And then I do end up using warm water at the end just to finish it up. So you saw how much dough I had stuck in there. So there you go. So get yourself a silicone sponge, brush, and cold soapy water. So I've let the dough rest. It looks pretty nice. It's not stuck, so that's good. And it looks beautiful. It's soft. It's holding its shape. I've learned, because I made the mistake once overproofed, I could just tell it wasn't holding its shape. When I baked, it didn't rise. It was kind of flat. You learn from every loaf you bake. That's one thing is for sure. And I can tell here that this is retaining its round shape. It's not completely spreading out. So that's a good sign. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a fold. And again, you want to be gentle. That's my doggy. You want to give it some structure. And the beauty of this is giving it some shape here. And you know, use the scraper. It is definitely handy in this phase. So now you can see it's even tighter. It's even a tighter ball, and that's what you want. And I kind of like to work it a little bit here so that it retains the round shape. But what we're going to do is we're going to flip this, but we're going to use the white rice flour here. This is the part that is going to go into the basket. So you want to make sure it is very well coated, and the basket is also coated, because we're going to flip this so the seam is up. And I'm getting a little obsessed with creating a tight, round package. So we're going to gently lift this. I should put it over here. Let me move this. You have to make room. Like I said, I'm usually over on the counter, so this is another learning thing. So you pick it up in one motion, and then it wasn't perfectly that way, but you can move it a little bit. It's still nice and round. You want this to be very well floured, because this is going to be the part that is on the bottom when you bake it. So you can see this where it's got a little funky shape, but it bakes on that side. You can see it's nice and loose still. And now what you do is you let this sit in the proofing basket for about an hour and a half. But again, it's not always time. It's about how it feels. Like right now, see how it's springing back so quickly? It's not ready. It's not relaxed enough. You want to be able to push it in and have it come back slowly. And you have to use a floured hand. So right now you can see it's kind of coming up quickly. So we're going to let it rest. I'm thinking it might be about an hour, because it still feels so warm and soft. And you just have to judge on your own. So I'm going to cover this, and I'm going to keep it in a warm place so it continues to proof here. And after this, it goes into the refrigerator. And I leave it in the refrigerator overnight, and I bake it in the morning. So it's good. It's important to cover this so it doesn't dry out at this point. And it's coated enough with the flour. So I'm just going to put it in this large Ziploc and let this sit here and let this rest until I like how it feels and springs back. It's the next morning and ready to bake the sourdough. An hour ahead of baking, I put the oven on at 500 with the Dutch oven covered inside. So that's in there preheating for an hour. And then just as I'm ready to bake, I take the bread out of the refrigerator at that time. You don't want it to come to room temperature beforehand. I take it out of the fridge and ready to go. So I wanted to show you, it still looks, soft, and you press it in and it relaxes, it bounces back slowly. So it's relaxed. It's not super springy. If it's super springy, it's not ready. We discussed that in the prior clip. So what I do now is we're going to score this, and I just sprinkle this on because you don't want it to stick to the paper. There's all kinds of ways to do this, but I just want to make it easy. Flip it over. Make sure it's centered into the paper, because this is what you're going to pick up to go into the oven. And it's beautifully round. I do like to use the scraper a little bit just to make sure my goal is to make the bread round so that. And in this video, I'm going to have a description to a post I read and the evolution of making the bread. My bread first started off like oblong, weird shapes because I wasn't using the Banneton basket. I was using a bowl. And then once I switched to the basket, the the loaves stayed round if they were proofed properly. So the key is the proofing. So if it's overproofed, it spreads out. When it has the right proofing, like this appears to be, it holds its shape. So what I do is I sprinkle the whole top generously with the white rice flour. And that is so that you get contrast from the scoring to the baked, to the rest of the baked bread. You'll see. You can use a knife. I used a knife in the beginning. The knife has to be super sharp to work, but I did find that this really is the best tool. And these blades are super thin and flexible. And I'm going to do just a simple pattern. I'm going to do a slice, and then I'm going to do like a little leaf pattern here. And in my blog post, you'll see other designs that I did, which I had pretty good results with. So I'm going to go in a circle, and I'm not looking for an ear, you know, where it flips up. I just like a nice smooth cut. I find that the ear, it just breaks off. I have never had as much luck going really fast. It always has caught. And I do go a few times because I want to make sure that it's a nice split. Mine always seems to have a jagged edge. This is a brand new blade, and I guess if I just went straight, it would do that, but I like to have a little curve. It's interesting. And I'm going to do a few slits here, just for some contrast, so you can see that when this bakes, the white highlights the pattern. And that's it. I'm going to keep it simple with this one. Maybe one more down. Set this aside. These do come with covers on them. I usually rinse it off, and I'll use this for a few times. So here's my pattern. I've got one slice here and then a few here. You can see it's a little jaggedy, but that's just the way it is. It's hard to keep practicing because you'd almost have to make several loaves just to practice the slicing, but I just keep doing that. And I keep referring back to that blog post I did because I took photos of all of my loaves as I've done them so that I could learn from each one. So now I'm going to put this in the oven for 20 minutes with the lid on at 500. Then we take the lid off, reduce the oven to 450, and bake for another 20 minutes. So let's do that. I'm just going to open the oven and then drop this in. It's nice to have it on the board so I can carry it over here. Super hot. You can see it's smoking. You just drop this right in. Put the lid back on. A sidebar about the basket. When I first got these, I put these in the laundry and I washed it. I got two, it is the set. And I washed this first and dried it. And then as I use it, I floured it generously, and you can see there's still residue. So I just take this off and I shake it out and brush it out to make sure that I get all that rice flour out of there. Then I just let it dry. I let it air dry, and then I just reuse it. It's not dirty. I just want to get that residue off and have it dry before I put it away. I haven't ventured to use this yet because this gives you that smooth finish on the top that you can score for the pattern. For some nice contrast. If you use this, you get these lines on the bread, which is also lovely if you just want a simple loaf and a simple score, then do this. I just find this is easy and it doesn't stick. I know if you use this, you can do other videos where people have to, you keep using the flour, and then eventually this will make a nice coating on there, kind of like you would do a cast iron seasoning, so to speak. So either way is fine, but if you like to do designs and scoring, I suggest sticking with the liner. But when you get it, wash it first, and then just keep wiping it out, brushing it off, and drying completely before you store it. It's been 20 minutes at 500 with the lid on. Now we're just going to take the lid off. And when I didn't try to do an ear, it's doing an ear. Here's how it looks so far. It looks beautiful. I took the lid off and reduced the temperature to 450, and it baked for another 20 minutes. So we're going to take it out and put it on the cooling rack. It's hot. We were super hot. I'm going to use these tongs to bring it out. You can take a look at that beautiful loaf. It has to sit here and cool before you slice it. You can see some steam is coming out. So it's got to sit for a couple hours. And when I wasn't trying to do an ear, I got an ear. That's the way the sourdough is. It's going to do its thing. But it's beautiful. And you can see how when the ear comes up, it gets darker. Take a look at the leaf pattern. And that's why you want the white rice flour, so you can see your slits. And you don't have to do the rice flour. You can just simply do a slice, and then the whole overall loaf will be brown. It's totally up to you. You'll see in my blog post links to Claire's video where she did. That's mainly how I learned from her. It's a trial and error. I'm going to let this cool, slice it open, and look at the crumb. But I'm very pleased with that. The loaf has maintained its round shape, which I'm very happy about. The rest of this flour you can brush off if you want less of that on there. So here it is. This is the last clip. The bread has rested for a couple hours now. I'm going to slice it. We can look at the crumb inside. When I do the slit this way, or that scoring, I like to cut it this way, or perpendicular to the scoring. And it is important to get a good bread knife. I had some other knife, and that was another thing I had to buy, is a good knife that will slice through it. Because you'll see that the crust, you got to get through that. Oh, I want to show you the bottom. Look how beautiful the bottom is. It's just amazing to me. All right, so we're going to slice this. It's like a pillow. Sometimes you have to do this and cut through that, because that does get pretty. It is, because it's at the bottom of that cast iron, so it's very crispy. Not very graceful. So you can see how beautiful that is. It's light and airy, soft and springy. It's moist. And I cut it this way because then I'll leave it on my counter and I will slice it this way as I'm using it for a few days. It's really hard to slice a big loaf this way with the round. And eventually I'll probably try the longer one. I forgot what it's called. But anyway, that would be more for sandwich bread. So I leave it like this, and I leave it face down on the counter, and we'll slice it this way. As a matter of fact, I'll just slice a piece here. It gets easier to slice as it dries. And again, it's that bottom crust is harder to cut through. So these are the first few slices. And what I do is I will either put this in the freezer to use later in the week. We go through just my husband and I would go through about a loaf a week. And I let this sit on the counter. And then after a day, I'll put it into a brown paper bag and leave it sit on the counter with in the brown bag. So when it's in the brown paper bag, it stays dry, because this is still moist and it lets the air breathe. It works beautifully well. I haven't had any problem with mold or drying out. It toasts up beautifully. The first day is best for, if you want to make a sandwich or just eat it this way. Otherwise, You know, you can toast it. It's nice. I've made garlic bread with it, croutons with it, having toast. So please check the blog post for resources. I do have some PDFs there for how I rewrote some of the recipes that made sense to me, and photos of my loaves so you can see the progression. In conclusion, is I'm a total newbie at this. I just started in June, and just learning as you go. You have to get your hands in there and trial and error to start to understand what is being said or seen in videos so that it makes sense to you. Because I feel like if you master the basics, then you can take that knowledge to incorporate into the next level, which I am not at yet. So thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe.